My name is Carlos, and I've spent the last 20 years restoring old homes across New England. You'd think after 2 decades of tearing down walls and pulling up floorboards, nothing would surprise me anymore. But on a cold October morning in 2023, I found something in the attic of a colonial house in Portland, Maine, that would shake me to my core and make me question everything I thought I knew about love, fate, and the cruelty of time. The house belonged to the estate of Margaret Holloway, who had passed away at 93 years old. Her granddaughter, Emma, had hired us to prepare the property for sale. My grandmother never married, Emma had told me during our first meeting, her voice tinged with sadness. She lived alone here for 70 years. We never knew why she chose solitude over companionship. That morning, the attic smelled of cedar and old paper, mixed with the musty scent of decades-old dust dancing in the thin streams of autumn light breaking through the small window. I could hear the distant sound of church bells from St. Mary's down the street marking 10 o'clock. The wooden floorboards creaked under my weight as I moved carefully through the cramped space, my breath visible in the cold air. I was checking the structural beams when I noticed something odd, a loose brick in the chimney that ran through the attic. It seemed deliberate, like someone had made it removable on purpose. My curiosity got the better of me. I pulled at the brick and it came away easily, revealing a small cavity behind it. Inside was a metal box, oxidized with age but still intact. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, the weight of it surprisingly heavy. Thought, why would someone hide this so carefully? When I opened the box, I found myself staring at dozens of yellowed envelopes, all addressed in the same careful masculine handwriting. The return address read, Pevet James Hartford, U.S. Army, APO 112, European Theater. Every single envelope was stamped, Return to Sender, or Addressee Unknown. Oh my God, these were war letters that never reached their destination. My heart sank as I realized what I was holding. Someone's entire heart poured onto paper, lost in the machinery of war and bureaucracy. The envelopes were addressed to Miss Margaret Holloway at various addresses across Maine and Massachusetts. I counted 47 letters in total, spanning from June 1944 to April 1945. Each one had been carefully preserved, though they'd clearly been hidden away for decades. The paper had that particular fragrance of old correspondence, a mixture of aging ink, vintage paper stock, and the faint ghost of cologne that had been applied to some of them. Reflection. That moment changed everything. I sat down on an old trunk, the dust making me cough slightly, and carefully opened the first letter. The date read June 8, 1944, just 2 days after D-Day. My hands shook as I began to read, and with the first words, I was transported back 80 years to a moment of pure, desperate love. My dearest Margaret, it began. I'm writing this from somewhere in France that I cannot name. The censors would strike it out anyway. All I can tell you is that I'm alive, and every breath I take is a breath closer to coming home to you. Do you remember our last night together at the harbor? The smell of salt water and your lavender perfume. I carry that memory like a talisman. It keeps me warm when the nights are cold and gives me courage when the fear threatens to swallow me whole. Oh my God, I couldn't believe the raw emotion in every line. This wasn't just a love letter. It was a lifeline thrown across an ocean, a desperate attempt to keep love alive in the face of unimaginable horror. But Margaret had never received it. She never knew he'd written to her. I spent the next 3 hours in that attic, the autumn sun slowly crossing the sky as I read letter after letter. James Hartford wrote about the sounds of artillery that reminded him of summer thunderstorms back home, about the French countryside that smelled of wild herbs and reminded him of Margaret's mother's garden, about the fear that gripped him before battle and the only thing that could calm it, the image of her smile. In a letter dated September 1944, he wrote, Today I saw a field of sunflowers and I swear every single one was facing toward you, back home. That's what I'm doing too, Maggie. Always turning toward you no matter where this war takes me. When I close my eyes, I can feel the texture of your blue cotton dress from the county fair, hear your laugh like wind chimes on a summer breeze. Thought, how could these letters never reach her? The most heartbreaking part was reading his growing concern in the later letters. By December 1944, his tone had shifted slightly. Maggie, I haven't heard from you in months. I tell myself it's the war, that mail gets lost or delayed. But there's a fear in me, a small voice that whispers you've moved on. that you've forgotten the boy who promised to marry you under the oak tree in your father's yard. Please, if you get this, write to me. Even one word would be enough. Just let me know you're still there, still waiting." But she had been waiting. She'd been waiting her entire life, never knowing that he'd written to her every single week, that his love had never wavered, that he'd been reaching out across the distance, trying desperately to touch her one more time. As I sat there in that cold attic, surrounded by decades of silence and lost love, I realized I was holding more than just old letters. I was holding the answer to why Margaret Holloway had spent 70 years alone in this house, and why sometimes love doesn't get a happy ending. Not because it wasn't strong enough, but because fate can be unbearably cruel. I couldn't just leave those letters in a box. Something about James Hartford's words demanded to be heard, demanded to be known. That evening, I sat in my small apartment with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, the rich aroma of the dark roast filling my one-bedroom space, and I continued reading, trying to piece together what had happened. Emma, Margaret's granddaughter, had given me her phone number in case any issues came up during the renovation. At 8 o'clock, with the sound of evening traffic humming outside my window and the streetlights casting long shadows across my living room, I called her. "Emma, this is Carlos from the restoration crew. I found something in your grandmother's attic today, something I think you need to see." There was a pause on the line, and I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background at her place. "What kind of something?" Her voice was cautious, uncertain. "Letters," I said simply. "Love letters from World War II. 47 of them, all returned undelivered." The silence that followed was so complete I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard her breath catch. "Oh my God, from who?" "A soldier named James Hartford. Do you know that name?" "No," she whispered. "My grandmother never spoke about any James. She never spoke about anyone, actually. We always assumed she just preferred to be alone." Her voice cracked slightly. "Can I come see them?" "Tomorrow morning." Emma arrived at the house at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee from the local cafe. I could smell the cinnamon in hers before she even entered. She was a woman in her mid-40s with her grandmother's same striking blue eyes. When I handed her the metal box, her hands trembled just as mine had. We sat together in what had been Margaret's living room, surrounded by old furniture covered in white sheets, dust motes dancing in the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The house still smelled faintly of Margaret's presence, lavender sachets and old books. Emma opened the first letter and began to read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Reflection, aquele momento mudou tudo." As she read, I watched tears stream down her face. James had written about meeting Margaret at a USO dance in Boston in early 1944. He described her as the girl in the blue dress who laughed like music and danced like she was floating. He was shipping out to Europe in 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks became the most important of his life. "They fell in love," Emma said, looking up at me with wonder and heartbreak mingling in her expression. "In 14 days, they fell completely in love." The letters painted a vivid picture. James wrote about taking Margaret to the harbor where they ate fish and chips wrapped in newspaper, the smell of salt and grease mixing with her lavender perfume. He described walking through Boston Common at night, the sound of their footsteps on the cobblestones, the way the gas lamps made her hair glow like copper. In one letter from July 1944, James wrote, "Maggie, do you remember what you said to me our last night together? You told me that love wasn't about time. It was about intensity. You said 2 weeks of real love was worth more than a lifetime of pretending. You were right, darling. I've lived more in those 14 days with you than in all my 23 years before." Emma pulled out her phone and began searching. James Hartford, World War II soldier. She scrolled through military records, genealogy sites, anything she could find. After 20 minutes, she found him. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Carlos, look at this." I leaned over to see her screen. There was a military record, Private James Michael Hartford, killed in action April 19, 1945, during the liberation of Germany, age 24, awarded the Bronze Star posthumously. The room suddenly felt colder despite the sunshine. The sound of a neighbor's lawnmower outside seemed distant and unreal. James had died just weeks before the war ended in Europe, never knowing if his letters had reached Margaret, never knowing if she still loved him. "But why didn't she get the letters?" Emma asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why were they all returned?" I picked up the envelopes, examining them more carefully. The addresses varied. Some were sent to Margaret's parents' house in Portland, others to an address in Boston, and still others to a residence in Portsmouth. She must have been moving around, I said. Maybe working different places during the war. A lot of young women did war work, moved to different cities for factory jobs or nursing. Emma's eyes widened. Oh God, she wouldn't have known he was writing to her. She probably thought he'd forgotten about her, or worse, that he'd found someone else overseas. Thought, the tragedy isn't just that he died, it's that she never knew he loved her until it was too late. We spent the rest of the morning reading through the letters chronologically. Each one revealed more about James, his sense of humor, his fear, his unwavering devotion. He wrote about the small things, the taste of bad coffee that reminded him of the diner where they had breakfast, the sound of rain on his tent that reminded him of walking with her under her umbrella, the smell of diesel fuel that somehow made him think of the bus they took to the harbor. In March 1945, just a month before he died, James wrote what I consider the most heartbreaking letter of all. Maggie, I haven't heard from you in almost a year now. Part of me has accepted that you've moved on, that you found someone who could give you the life you deserve instead of a soldier who might never come home. But I need you to know something. Even if you've forgotten me, even if you're married to someone else and happy, I don't regret a single moment. Those 14 days with you made me understand what it means to be truly alive. So thank you, my darling. Thank you for showing me what love really is, even if I never get to hold you again. If you're enjoying this story, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced a love that felt too intense, too short, but somehow perfect in its own way. Emma and I became obsessed with uncovering the full story. Over the next week, she brought her grandmother's personal papers to the house. Old diaries, photograph albums, and documents that Margaret had left behind. Together, we began piecing together the tragic puzzle that had defined Margaret Holloway's entire life. In Margaret's diary from 1944, we found the entries that confirmed our suspicions. Emma read aloud, her voice catching on almost every word. June 15, 1944. It's been 2 months since James shipped out. I checked the mail every single day. Nothing. Did I imagine how he felt about me? Those 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. But maybe for him it was just a brief distraction before war. I can't eat, I can't sleep, I just wait. The diary entries became progressively more desperate. Margaret had indeed moved around during the war, first to work at a munitions factory in Massachusetts, then to Portsmouth for a nursing training program, and finally back to her parents' home in Portland. Each move meant a different address, and apparently the military postal service couldn't keep up with her changes of location. Thought every letter he sent was chasing her ghost across New England. By August 1944, Margaret wrote, I have to accept it. James isn't writing because he doesn't want to. Maybe he met a French girl, or maybe I was just a sweet memory before he faced reality. My mother keeps telling me to move on, to say yes to Tom Peterson, who's been asking to court me. Tom is nice. Tom is here. Tom didn't abandon me with promises he never intended to keep. Oh my God. Reading her words while knowing the truth, that James had been writing to her every week, pouring his heart onto paper that never reached her, was almost unbearable. The cruelty of it was suffocating. In the living room where we sat, the afternoon light had taken on a melancholy quality, and outside we could hear the sound of wind chimes from a neighbor's porch, their tinkling sound somehow making everything sadder. Emma discovered something else in the papers, a small leather notebook that contained Margaret's poems. She'd been a poet, something even her granddaughter hadn't fully known. One poem, dated December 1944, read, I wait for words that never come, for ink that's dried on foreign shores. My mailbox echoes, cold and numb, while memory opens, then closes doors. Did your promises float away, like dandelion seeds in spring? Or did the war just steal the day we both believed in everything? Reflection. She was grieving a love that was still alive, just silent. Emma had to stop reading, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She spent her whole life thinking he abandoned her. She whispered, Carlos, do you understand? My grandmother died believing she'd meant nothing to him. She died alone, thinking the greatest love of her life had been one-sided. I found myself struggling with my own emotions. In 20 years of restoration work, I'd found old photographs, forgotten jewelry, even money hidden in walls. But this was different. This was active tragedy, still reverberating through generations. We discovered that in May 1945, Margaret had received the telegram. Emma found it pressed in the diary, the paper yellowed but the words still sharp. The War Department regrets to inform you that Private James Michael Hartford was killed in action on April 19, 1945. But here's the thing that made it even more tragic. The telegram had been forwarded to 3 different addresses before finally reaching Margaret's parents' house in June. By the time she received it, the war in Europe was over. Everyone was celebrating, and Margaret was learning that the boy she'd loved, the boy she thought had forgotten her, was dead. Margaret's diary entry from that day: James is dead. He died in April, and I'm only learning about it now. The War Department found me to tell me he's gone, but he never found me to tell me he loved me. What kind of cruel universe works like this? I spent a year being angry at him, thinking he'd moved on, and all along he was fighting and dying while I was here resenting him. I will never forgive myself, never. The smell of fresh apple pie drifted in from a neighbor's kitchen through the open window. Such a normal, homely scent that it felt obscene in the face of such tragedy. The sound of children playing in the street outside seemed to come from another world entirely. Emma found photographs of Margaret from the 1950s and 60s. A beautiful woman with sad eyes, always alone in the pictures, always with that same distant expression. She never dated anyone after the war, Emma said. My mother always said Grandma was married to her solitude. We thought she was just independent, maybe asexual or uninterested in romance. We never imagined she was carrying this. In the later diary entries, from the 1950s and 60s, Margaret's writing had changed. The grief had transformed into something else, a kind of frozen determination. She wrote in 1956, I made my choice years ago, though I didn't know I was making it. I gave my heart to a boy in a uniform, and when he died, my heart died with him. Tom Peterson married Sally Winters last year. They have 2 children now. I'm happy for them, but that life was never meant for me. I had my 2 weeks, my 14 perfect days. Some people don't even get that much. Thought she had convinced herself that brief love was enough. But was it? Was it really enough? Looking at the stack of undelivered letters, at the evidence of James's persistent, unwavering devotion, I couldn't help but think that Margaret had been robbed of something essential. Not just James's presence, but the knowledge that she had been loved so completely. We have to tell people this story, Emma said suddenly, her voice fierce through her tears. We have to make sure people know what happened. My grandmother lived 70 years in silence, but these letters deserve to be heard. I nodded, looking at the metal box that had held so many secrets for so long. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the floor, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang again, the same bells that had been ringing when I first discovered the box. The revelation that changed everything came from the most unexpected source, the local historical society. Emma had contacted them, hoping to learn more about James Hartford and the military postal system during World War II. A week after we first discovered the letters, a historian named Dr. Patricia Thornton visited the house with a folder full of documents and a grave expression on her face. The smell of rain was in the air that morning, petrichor mixing with the scent of the old house's wooden beams. Dr. Thornton sat with us in the living room, now partially cleared of furniture, and spread her documents across a makeshift table we'd set up. I need to tell you something that will be difficult to hear, she began, adjusting her glasses. I've researched the addresses on these letters, and I've found something troubling. Emma and I exchanged glances. What could be more troubling than what we already knew? Dr. Thornton pulled out a military postal report from 1944-1945. The mail routing system during the war was imperfect, but not this imperfect. 47 letters returned undelivered, all to the same person. That's statistically improbable, so I dug deeper into the specific addresses. She pointed to one envelope. This address, Margaret's parents' home in Portland, was correct and stable throughout the war. Her parents lived there from 1940 to 1960. There's no reason letters sent there should have been returned as addressee unknown. Oh my God. My stomach dropped. What are you saying? Dr. Thornton pulled out another document, a newspaper clipping from the Portland Press-Herald, dated 1944. Margaret's mother, Dorothy Holloway, was interviewed for a piece about mothers supporting the war effort. In it, she mentions her daughter Margaret and says, and I quote, "My daughter has moved past her youthful infatuation with a local boy who went off to war. She's focused on her nursing training now and has good prospects with several respectable young men here in Portland." Emma's face went pale. No, you can't mean. I believe Margaret's mother intercepted the letters, Dr. Thornton said quietly. I think she was receiving them, marking them as undeliverable, and returning them to sender. She was essentially ensuring that James and Margaret couldn't communicate. The room spun. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began pattering against the windows. The sound seemed to underscore the horror of what we were learning. But why? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Why would she do that? Dr. Thornton pulled out more documentation, social columns from the local newspaper, church bulletins, society pages. Your great-grandmother Dorothy came from Old Portland money. The Holloways were socially prominent. James Hartford, according to his military records, was the son of a factory worker from South Boston. Different class entirely. Reflection. The cruelty of love destroyed by prejudice. She thought he wasn't good enough, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. She thought she was protecting her daughter from an unsuitable match. I believe so, yes, Dr. Thornton confirmed. And when James died, she probably thought her secret was safe. Margaret would mourn briefly and then move on to someone more appropriate. Dorothy couldn't have predicted that Margaret would never love anyone else. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Rain was falling harder now, drumming on the roof, streaming down the glass. My great-grandmother destroyed my grandmother's entire life. She stole 70 years of happiness from her own daughter. Oh my God, how could anyone do that? I thought about the diary entries, about Margaret's self-blame and guilt. Margaret never knew, I said. She died thinking she'd somehow failed James, thinking she hadn't meant enough to him. She carried that guilt her whole life. There's more, Dr. Thornton said softly. She pulled out one final document, a letter, but this one was different. It wasn't in James's handwriting. I found this in the military archives. It was sent by James's commanding officer to the Hartford family after his death. In it, the officer mentions that James had spoken often about a girl named Margaret, and that he'd written to her faithfully until the very end. The officer had assumed she'd received the letters and knew how devoted James had been. The letter included a small detail that broke my heart completely. Private Hartford carried a photograph of Miss Holloway in his breast pocket. It was with him when he died. He showed it to anyone who would look, telling them about the girl he was going to marry when he got home. His love for her gave him courage in the darkest times. I thought, he died with her picture over his heart, never knowing she thought he'd abandoned her. Emma was crying openly now, her forehead pressed against the rain-streaked window. What do we do with this information? My great-grandmother is long dead. There's no one to confront, no way to fix this. But there was something we could do. I stood up, my decision crystallizing in that moment. We tell their story, I said firmly. We make sure people know what happened, the truth of it. Margaret lived in silence, but we don't have to. These letters deserve to be heard. Their love deserves to be known. Dr. Thornton nodded. I can help with that. The Historical Society would be honored to preserve these letters and tell this story. It's an important piece of history, not just about the war, but about love and class and the terrible choices people make when they think they know what's best. Outside, the storm was intensifying. Lightning flashed across the dark afternoon sky, illuminating the room in stark white light. Thunder followed immediately, shaking the old house's foundations. It felt appropriate somehow, nature itself responding to the revelation of such profound injustice. I want to read one more letter, Emma said, turning from the window. The last one he wrote. I need to know his final words to her. I found the last letter, dated April 15th, 1945, just 4 days before James died. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read aloud as rain pounded against the windows and the storm raged outside, matching the tempest of emotions swirling inside that old house where Margaret had spent 70 years grieving a love that had never actually died. The last letter James Hartford ever wrote was dated April 15th, 1945. I read it aloud to Emma and Dr. Thornton while the storm raged outside, my voice barely steady. My dearest Maggie, this is letter number 47. I've counted each one, dated them, poured my heart into every word. I have no idea if you've received even one of them, but I'm going to believe, I have to believe, that somewhere, somehow, my words are reaching you. We're pushing deeper into Germany now. The war is ending, Maggie, I can feel it. Maybe weeks, maybe days. Everyone is talking about going home, about the lives waiting for them, and all I can think about is you. Do you remember what you said to me that last night at the harbor? You said, James, even if we only have this moment, Even if tomorrow takes you away and I never see you again, I want you to know that these 2 weeks have been the realest thing I've ever felt. Don't forget me. Maggie, I could never forget you. You're written into every part of me. When I close my eyes, I smell lavender and salt water. When I hear music, I feel your hand in mine as we danced. When I'm afraid, I think of your smile, and somehow, I find courage. I'm making plans for us. When I get home, and I will come home, I promise you, I'm going to find you. Even if you've moved on, even if you've forgotten the boy who fell in love with you in 14 days, I need to see you one more time. I need to look into your eyes and tell you that you saved my life, not just here in this war, but in every way that matters. You made me understand what it means to be human, to be vulnerable, to be brave enough to love someone completely even when you know you might lose them. Wait for me, darling. I'm coming home to you. All my love, forever and always, James. 4 days after writing those words, James Hartford was killed during the final Allied push into Germany. He died believing his letters were reaching Margaret, died planning a future that would never come, died with her photograph over his heart. The silence after I finished reading was broken only by the sound of rain softening to a gentle patter. Emma was openly weeping, and even Dr. Thornton had tears streaming down her face. I found my own cheeks wet. She never knew, Emma whispered. Oh God, she never knew he was coming back for her. She never knew he'd written 47 letters. She died thinking he'd forgotten her after 2 weeks. But that's not quite where the story ends. 3 months after discovering the letters, Emma organized an event at the Portland Historical Society. We displayed all 47 letters in carefully preserved frames, told the complete story of James and Margaret, and invited the public to bear witness to this tragic love story that had been hidden for nearly 80 years. Over 200 people came that first day. They stood in front of the letters, reading James's words, learning about Margaret's lifetime of grief based on a misunderstanding orchestrated by her own mother. Many cried. Many shared their own stories of lost loves and missed connections. Reflection. Their story touched something universal in all of us. But here's what I didn't expect. We found James's family. His great-nephew, David Hartford, came to the exhibition after reading about it in the newspaper. He brought photographs of James, military medals, and letters James had sent to his own parents, letters that had successfully reached their destination. My great-uncle James talked about Margaret in every letter home, David told us, his voice thick with emotion. My grandmother, his sister, used to tell me about the girl who broke his heart. They thought she'd rejected him, that she never wrote back. The family always wondered why she never contacted them after he died. Now we know she didn't even get his letters. Emma and David stood together in front of the exhibition, 2 people connected by a love story from 80 years ago, and they decided to do something beautiful. They arranged for James's remains. He'd been buried in an American military cemetery in Europe, to be repatriated and reburied in Portland, next to Margaret's grave. On a crisp October morning in 2024, exactly 1 year after I'd found the letters, we held a ceremony. The cemetery smelled of cut grass and fallen leaves, that distinctive autumn scent of things ending and changing. Church bells rang in the distance, the same bells I had heard that first morning in the attic. At Margaret's headstone, which had always simply read, Margaret Holloway, 1925-2018, at peace, we added a new inscription, Beloved of James Hartford, always waiting. And at James's new marker, beneath his name and military honors, we added, Beloved of Margaret Holloway, always faithful. We placed all 47 letters in a waterproof container and buried them between the 2 graves, finally delivering them to their intended recipient, even if she could only receive them in spirit. Thought, some letters arrive late, but they still matter. As I stood there at the ceremony, watching Emma place a bouquet of lavender, Margaret's favorite, on her grandmother's grave, I thought about the nature of love and time and all the ways life can be unbearably unfair. James and Margaret had 14 days together, 2 weeks out of entire lifetimes, and yet that brief connection had been enough to define them both, to shape 70 years of Margaret's life and to give James courage in his final months. Was it tragic? Absolutely. Their story is a tragedy of the highest order, love destroyed not by war or death or distance, but by prejudice and misguided protection. But was it also beautiful? Yes, because real love, the kind that lasts and means something, isn't measured in years or days. It's measured in intensity, in truth, in the courage to be vulnerable with another person, even when you know it might end. This story teaches us that words matter, that love matters, that the connections we make, however brief, can echo through generations. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. Share in the comments. Have you ever experienced a love that felt timeless, even if it was brief? Leave your story below. Remember, you are more precious than you know, and your words have more power than you imagine. And you, yes, you watching this, what do you value more? A long life of comfortable convenience or brief moments of intense, genuine connection? Margaret and James had 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks mattered more than some people's entire lifetimes. Their letters finally reached their destination. May your own words of love never go undelivered. May you always say what needs to be said before time runs out.